Welcome to Storytime with Freedom for All. Today, it's going to be talking about North and South Korea and its history, and why it was split at the 38th parallel after World War II. So basically, the United States, Soviet Union, well, we decided without their permission. Yep, that's exactly what happened. But before all that, this is coming directly from the History Channel, a unified Korea. Okay. For centuries before the division, the peninsula was a single unified Korea, ruled by generations of dynastic kingdoms, occupied by Japan after Russo-Japanese War in 1905, and formally annexed 5 years later. Korea chafed under the Japanese colonial rule for 35 years, until the end of World War II, when its division into two nations began. The catalyzing incident is the decision that was made really without the Koreans involved between the Soviet Union and the unified states to divide Korea into two occupation zones, says Michael Robinson, professor emeritus in East Asian Studies of History and History at Indiana University, who has written extensively on both modern Korea and its history. So, why was it divided? That's a good question. It's a very good question. So in August 1945, the two allies divided control over the Korean peninsula. Over the next 3 years, 1945 to 48, a Soviet army and its proxy set up a communist regime in the area north latitude 38 degrees north, or the 38th parallel. South of that line, a military government was formed, supported by the United States. While the Soviet policies were widely popular in the bulk of the North's laborer and peasant population, most middle-class Koreans fled south to the 38th parallel, where the majority of the Korean population resides today. Meanwhile, the U.S.-supported regime in the South clearly favored anti-communist rightist elements, according to Robinson. The ultimate objective was for the Soviet and the United States to leave and let the Koreans figure it out, he explains. The trouble was that the Cold War intervened, and everything that was tried to create a middle ground or to try to reunify the peninsula is thwarted by both the Soviet and United States, not wanting to give in to the other. In 1948, the United States called for a United Nations-sponsored vote for all Koreans to determine the future of the peninsula. After the North refused to participate, the South formed its own government in Seoul, and led by the strongly anti-communist Singnam Rhee. I don't know if I pronounced that properly. I probably did not. The North responded in kind, installing the former communist guerrilla Kim Il-sung, not sure if I said that properly either, as the first premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the capital of Pyongyang. So, this is when the war happens, in 1950 to 1953, which killed at least 2.5 million people, and did little to resolve the question of which regime represented the true Korea. It did, however, firmly establish the United States as the permanent bête noire of North Korea. As the U.S. military bombed villages, towns, and cities across the northern half of the peninsula, they leveled the country, Robinson says. They destroyed every city. The armistice that ended the conflict in 1953 left the peninsula divided much as before, with a demilitarized zone running roughly along the 38th parallel. Unlike another Cold War era separation between East and West Germany, there has been extremely little movement across the DMZ between the North and South Korea since 1953. Robinson describes the border as hermetically sealed, which helps to explain the drastically different paths the two nations have taken in continuing divide between them. Hence why the North is fighting in Russia for Putin. Pretty drastic change there. So your opportunity to ask anybody from North Korea about their history is extremely limited because they don't even know their own history because they're not taught that. They're taught whatever fits the leaders. That's why education isn't standardized there, because they want to control your mind. That's why cutting our education and forcing us into private schools and giving us vouchers, we don't need that system. We already have a system that's in place that works in plenty other fucking first world nations and even, guess what, third world countries. Schooling works. Our school system may be broken, but it doesn't need to be gutted and eradicated, okay? We don't need more far-right Christian evangelists teaching our children that they're the divine chosen people, or anybody, any religion. I'm not picking on just one specific religion. This opens up a terrible path for us people. Just think about what's happening now and what we've seen in history. There's plenty other choices, and there's plenty other examples. You want to make the choices that will also make sure that we will be a good example in history? Or are you going to be the fools who continue to make the wrong choices and we just become another history lesson? Now's the time to make that choice. I've been trying for 8 years to tell people he was bad news. Man, I don't know how you bought into it again and again and again. Jesus Christ. You people make me sick. I went to a church food bank the other day. There was a couple of people who didn't speak very good English, who were looking for food and needed help. First time I've seen them there. I've only gone there a few times because I needed help. Because things are fucking tough, okay? And it's a church. And you know what one of the ladies said? Well, at least you speak English. The least you could do when you come to our country is speak English. And I said, how do you know they're not trying to speak English? I know Spanish. I can read, write, speak it pretty good since I learned it in high school. I'm not like a linguistic. I'm not good at it. I'm not fluent in any manner. But I can understand some of it. She can speak Spanish too. So what is the problem? If you can speak their language, why don't you teach them some of the linguists that you know English, you know Spanish. They know both too. I've heard them speak some English words, but they also had a phone that helped them translate when you didn't understand what they were saying. But if you could speak their language and nobody else around could speak Spanish, why didn't you help them? You're at a church handing out food to the needy, and you're going to say that to somebody? No. That's rude. And that's the problem. You think you're righteous? Does this make you feel righteous? You're gonna speak about exiled communities or isolated communities, quote, that's what she said. They live in isolated communities. I said, you are the one isolating them. How can they feel comfortable speaking English when you feel the way you do and you are so boldly now expressing that? They're still in the room, by the way. Yeah. Shame. Shame on you. I'd call you out on it. But I'm not that kind of person. I'm not going to drag your name through. But if you watch this video and you see my face, you know who you are. I don't care how old you are. It's time for another change in your life. Is this what your Jesus would fucking do? I highly doubt it. Jesus didn't say, this is my body, this is my blood. Do you speak my language to accept this offering? No. I'm going to tell you a story. A little bit from my life, okay? I worked with a young man many years back. I say young man. We were both young men. We were the same age, basically. He come from L.A. His parents were fortunate enough to come here when they were children, and the grandparents don't speak a lick of English. The grandparents' neighbors were Puerto Rican, I believe, not a lick of English. My friend's name was an English name because his parents wanted to make sure that he could assimilate better in America by giving him a traditional English American name. I'm not going to tell you his name because it doesn't matter. But his friends would call him something a little bit different, so it would sort of fit his heritage. He didn't know any of his native language because his parents didn't want to teach him that because they didn't want him to not fit in the United States. So his grandparents and their neighbors, for decades since they've been here, they have learned bits and pieces of each other's language, but not fluent enough to be able to speak full conversations. I'm sure over the years they picked things up. But he said he recalled as a child being at his grandparents' house with the neighbors over there because his grandparents and the neighbors had dinner once a week, every week. Didn't speak each other's languages. But you know what they did? They had dinner and they resolved their differences with body language and different things that they could do to tell each other what was going on, and had dinner every week together for decades. That is community. Don't forget it.